title of my sermon today is God Gives Sight in Darkness. That's the same, of course, as the theme for the day. And I'm going to start by telling you a bit of a story that will help set a context. In the year 2000, a man named Mike May experienced something most of us will never have to imagine. When he was 3 years old, a chemical explosion took away his sight. He lost one eye completely and the other eye was damaged irreparably. For more than 40 years, Mike lived in total darkness. Then the doctors offered him a way to gain some of his sight back. When the bandages finally came off, light flooded into his world. But seeing was not easy. Mike could detect color and shape, but his brain couldn't make sense of what his eyes were seeing, what his eyes were sending to the brain. Faces looked flat. Objects appeared disconnected. Stares felt dangerous. At one point, he said something surprising. Seeing is more confusing than being blind. For years, his body had adapted to darkness. Vision was a gift, but it was also disorienting. He had to learn how to live in a world that he wasn't used to. Mike May's story helps us step into John 9, where Jesus encounters a man who had never seen at all. Not because of an accident, not because of disease, but because he was born blind. Both men faced darkness, and in both stories, sight comes not because they figured something out, but because light comes to them. Grace comes before understanding, and sight, real sight, is given, not earned. John 9 is not just a healing story. It's a story about how Jesus enters human darkness and gives the sight we cannot give ourselves. At the center of this story is the good news of one clear truth. God gives sight in darkness. Not after we fix ourselves, not once we understand everything, not when we finally get it right. He decides. God gives sight in darkness. We've just read the story, and Paul read it for us so well. So let's consider what John and God have to teach us with this story. The story opens with a question that feels familiar. Walking down the street, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. The disciples asked, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? That's an old question, but it's still with us. Who's at fault? What went wrong? Why did this happen? We may not always say it out loud, but when suffering shows up, we often look for someone or something to blame. We want to blame ourselves, others, even God. We want a reason that will make it feel less painful. Jesus refuses to blame the son or the parents. Jesus said, you're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame. There's no such cause-effect here. Look instead for what God can do. We need to be energetically at work for the one who sent me here, working while the sun shines. When the night falls, the workday is over. For as long as I am in the world, there is plenty of light. I am the world's light. Verses 3 to 5 in the Message version. Oh, Jesus says, neither this man nor his parents sinned. Perhaps he was thinking, stop looking for someone to blame. Stop turning suffering into a moral math problem. You see, at this time, it was a common belief that suffering was because of sin. Someone did something that resulted in God's punishment. And that's been common enough down through the ages. When anything goes wrong is bad, it must be because of the sin. Something was done that resulted in God's punishment. But Jesus doesn't explain the man's blindness. He seems to be challenging the thinking behind the question itself. This matters because for people who are already hurting, explanations can feel like accusations. Jesus doesn't say the blindness was good. He does not say God wanted it. He does not say God caused the suffering. He says something different. This happened so that God's works might be revealed in him. Jesus refuses to blame the man or his parents or God. Instead, he points to what God will do. Darkness is not explained. It's interrupted. God does not stand at a distance analyzing suffering. God steps into it and brings light where none existed before. This man was blind from birth. He had no experience of light before, until God stepped in and brought that light. Suffering is not the place where God gives up, because God gives sight in darkness. And he acts first. Excuse me. In verses 6 and 7, he said this, and then spit in the dust, made a clay paste with his saliva, rubbed the paste on the blind man's eyes, and said, "Go, wash at the pool of Siloam." Siloam means sent. So he was sending the man to the place that would complete the process. The man went and washed and saw. Jesus wasn't asked. He just knelt, spat on the ground, made the mud, and put it on his eyes. It's a strange, messy, physical thing. This is not a polished miracle. This is the incarnation, God in human flesh. It's Jesus using dirt and saliva coming out of his own body, the saliva interacting with real bodies and real wounds. God doesn't heal from a distance. God gets close enough to touch. Before this man understands who Jesus is, before he believes anything, before he obeys anything, Jesus acts. That order matters. God's mercy, God's grace moves first. Grace doesn't wait for readiness, for us to be ready for it. Jesus tells the man, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam." And John adds editorially, which means sent. John tends to do that, add little bits here and there. And the man goes and he washes, and he comes back seeing. It would have been easy for John to turn this into a lesson about obedience. But notice, the healing was already underway. The mud's already on his eyes. Jesus, the healer, has come to the man. Jesus has touched him. Jesus is our healing. The washing doesn't earn sight. It receives it. This is how grace works. God acts first. We respond later, when we figure it out. Often without fully understanding, often confused, often stumbling toward what we do not yet see. Why? Because God gives sight in darkness. But when there's darkness, you can't see, but God gives it. You might expect, after the miracle, you might expect celebration. Instead, there's confusion. The neighbors argue about whether he's the same person or not. The religious leaders interrogate him. His parents distance themselves out of fear. Healing doesn't always make life easier right away. Sometimes it makes things harder. But watch what happens to the man. At first, he refers to Jesus simply as the man called Jesus. A bit later, as his understanding increases, he calls him a prophet. And then eventually, we see him realizing he calls him Lord. His understanding has grown. God's grace keeps meeting him where he is, and he grows a bit more, and he grows a bit more. Faith here is not a leap. It didn't go from not knowing to conversion to understanding. It was a slow awakening. It was a bit like Mike May learning to see. This man has sight before he understands clearly. Mike May's story is a bit different because he had had vision before. He was perhaps expecting to be able to see perfectly, and learned that he didn't, but he learned how to use what vision he gained. But it's important to realize that the healed man here sees perfectly. He didn't have any preconceived notions about what and how, but he saw and understood what he saw, because that was part of the miracle. God fixed it. It wasn't some attempt by man to do what was required. It's important for anyone who feels unsure, hesitant, or confused about faith. You don't have to see clearly to be healed. You don't have to understand everything to be found, because God gives sight in darkness. The irony of the story sharpens. The Pharisees, the ones confident in their vision, can't see what's happening. Their certainty becomes their blindness. They know the rules, they know the categories, but they can't recognize life standing in front of them. They don't recognize Jesus. Jesus later says, I came into this world so that those who do not see may see, and those who think they see may become blind. And in essence, that's what happens here. This is not an insult. Jesus is never cruel, but it's a warning. It appears that blindness here is not about intelligence or morality. The religious leaders refuse grace because it doesn't arrive on their terms. They saw what had happened, but they couldn't accept it because, well, that's not the right way. Ignoring the fact that the miracle had taken place, and this man who had been blind from birth now could see. And the only possible conclusion was that he had been healed by God. But it wasn't happening the way they wanted it to, so they rejected it. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't learning something new, but letting go of what we think we already know. Sometimes our darkness is certitude and stubbornness. This is what I've always believed, that I'm not going to change. But God gives sight in darkness. One of the most tender moments in the story comes later. After the man is thrown out of the religious community, he gets kicked out because, well, he answers them. And it's actually pretty funny, the way he does it. He accuses them having come to him the third time to ask him how it happened. And he was fed up with giving them the same story over and over again, and finally says, "Oh, you're so interested. I guess you want to become his disciple too." Which was just the wrong thing to say. They went ballistic. They went ballistic and kicked him out, because basically he showed them the truth. But Jesus goes looking for him. The healed man, you notice, doesn't chase Jesus down. Jesus seeks him and finds him. Jesus heard they'd thrown him out and went and found him. Verses 35 to 38. He asked him, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And the man said, "Point him out to me, sir, so that I can believe in him." Jesus said, "You're looking right at him. Don't you recognize my voice?" Because up until that point, he hadn't seen Jesus. He went and washed, and when he came back, Jesus wasn't there. He'd only heard his voice and done what he was told. At this point, of course, the man, "Oh yeah, I recognize you. Master," he says. Now, for being a prophet, now he's master. "Lord," the man said, and worshipped him. Now, going over it, Jesus asked, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The man answers honestly, "Who is he, sir? Tell me so I can believe." And Jesus says, "You've seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." And the man believes and he worships him. Notice again the order. Jesus seeks and finds him. Jesus reveals himself to him, and faith follows. Even when we're unsure and questioning, like the man was, Jesus doesn't shame us. He shares his faith with us. Jesus, the Son of Man, who is both God and human, has perfect faith in his Father God. And mysteriously, somehow, we're included in that. Faith is a gift from God, and so is sight. Paul wrote that in Ephesians 2. "For by grace are you saved through faith. It is the gift of God, not of works, so that any man should boast." That's true, because God gives sight in darkness. The cross is behind all of this. John 9 is not only about eyesight, it points forward. The one who gives sight will soon be treated as blind. The one who heals will be wounded. The one who brings light, the one who is the light of the world, will willingly submit to darkness for us. Jesus will go to the cross. On the cross, Jesus enters the deepest darkness, rejection, shame, and death itself. He's not a victim of circumstance. He goes by choice for the sake of the world. We cannot face the darkness alone. So Jesus faced it for us, in our place. This is what they mean by vicarious love. Jesus stands where we cannot stand. He carries what we cannot carry. Jesus entered our world with all its darkness, the darkness of the cross and the darkness of death. But trusting his Father, by the power of the Spirit, Jesus rose from the grave. Now darkness does not get the final word. God gives sight in darkness. This story is shaped by the life of the triune God. As we know, triune simply means consisting of three. God is Trinity, three in one. The Father sends the Son into the world, not to condemn it, but to bring light. The Son enters human darkness, gives himself fully, and reveals God's heart. The Spirit opens eyes, awakens trust, and sustains new life. Sight is not a human accomplishment. It's the shared work of Father, Son, and Spirit. We do not climb our way into clarity. We're found. Interestingly, the healed man does not become a preacher. He becomes a witness. He tells the truth. All I know is I was blind and now I see. His mission here is not pressure. It's the overflow of the goodness that he received. When God opens our eyes, we naturally speak from what we've received. We notice people differently. We listen more carefully. We carry light into ordinary places. Not because we must be able to earn God's love or grace, but because God's already changed how we see. How has God changed how you see? Could you tell someone about it this week? Why does it matter to you today? Some of us may feel we're in the dark now. Some of us may see glimmers of hope and light but still feel unsure. Some of us are confident that we see clearly until we don't. The story makes room for all of that. It promises that darkness is not disqualifying. Confusion is not failure. Questions are not the opposite of faith. Jesus still kneels in the dirt. Jesus still touches what others afford. You remember, Jesus was touching lepers and healed them, when in the society that he lived in, where he was, that the last thing you ever would do would be to touch a leper. They rang a bell to warn people off so that they wouldn't accidentally touch them and be contaminated by that. Jesus still finds people who've been pushed aside. And he still gives sight. He still shows us something that perhaps we hadn't seen. I remember so well wondering how I was going to go on when my Jenny died, and how that Jesus, God revealed to me, hey, you don't have to worry. While you're having trouble walking, I'll carry you. And when you're strong, I'll put you down again. He doesn't wait till we're ready. Not once. He doesn't wait till we understand. But right in the middle of darkness, he is there. Because God gives sight in darkness. Amen.